everyone. I'm Shelley Lyle,
And I'm Jessica Francis.
and we're excited you're participating in the Office of Engaged Learning and Outreach Virtual Career Development Week. We're starting this week off by interviewing Lauren Leshefsky, who's with the Tampa Bay Rays, and she's also a UF alum, and her current role is Human Resources Coordinator. So welcome, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet everyone virtually.
We're so excited to jump into some questions with you. So just to get started, can you tell us a little bit about what your role as an HR coordinator entails?
Yeah, so as an HR coordinator, I would consider myself kind of a generalist. I do a lot of the different aspects of the human resources world. I help recruiting. My boss is mostly the recruiter, but I help him with that. I hire a lot of our part-time employees. I help with the benefits, and I also help a lot with the culture.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to talk about a few different topics. So we've kind of divided it up into resumes, cover letters, networking, and interviews. So I'll start us out with resumes and would love to hear your thoughts on when you're reviewing resumes. What are the three things you look at first?
Yeah, so I definitely look at if at the top you kind of have like your name and your email and your contact information, because if we do like you, then we want to reach out to you, and we don't want it to have to be an issue to like look for your contact information. Like, we want to have that very easily above at the top. We also just want to see kind of work experience that's related to the job that you're applying to. So say you're applying to a job in stadium operations. Like, we want to see specific experiences that relate to that. Like, maybe a community service job, which could be good for another related job, isn't necessarily needed on a resume for a stadium operations job. So just kind of putting the experiences you have for that specific related job and changing the resume based on like what job you're applying for. And then also, just, you might be asking this later, but just for length of resume, definitely try to keep it to a page as much as you can. Obviously, if you get later in your life and you're applying to stuff, like, you're going to have a lot more experiences, so you might need more than one page. But at this point in your job career experience, like, you've only really been doing experience from like high school and college, so keeping it down to a page is really important.
Awesome. And following up on that, high school. So do you have students at high school stuff if it pertains to the job they're applying for? Do you kind of feel like at some point it's a little more irrelevant?
Yeah, it definitely depends on kind of the specific job that you're doing and if that relates to the job. So like, say you got a certification in high school, it's still relevant and still important to the job you're applying to, then definitely include that on your resume. But maybe if there's something less relevant, like you were on your high school basketball team, which is very good and very important, like, that might not need to be added onto the resume unless it specifically applies to the job that you're applying for.
Awesome. And what are things you notice that applicants miss or do wrong that makes you pass on their resume kind of right away?
Definitely make sure that everything is spelled and grammatically correct. I know it definitely depends on the person, but at least for me and a lot of people who work for the Rays and the Rowdies, if we see a grammatical error, especially something that's like super easy, like you spell, I don't know, resources wrong or something, say for like a human resources job, like, we know that maybe you didn't pay as much attention to your resume as you could have. So definitely just making sure that everything is spelled correctly and everything is grammatically correct, because if you're not even checking that, then in our minds, a lot of times it's like, what else are you not going to like double check in your job?
Awesome. And what are your thoughts on headshots on resumes? This has kind of been a newer thing I've noticed in our students, and so I'd love your feedback.
I've actually never heard of that. I haven't seen one yet with a headshot, but I honestly think that a headshot is good on one, especially as long as you can still keep it down to a page and like make it look nice on your resume. I've never seen one actually, so I don't know how usually they're situated on the resume. But I think it could be really good, just because, at least for me specifically, like, I like to kind of get like faces to names when I'm like thinking about people and looking at people. So seeing a face to like your experience and stuff, I feel like I get to know an employee a lot more, which is something that's good. So if you can put it on there nicely, I think a headshot could be really cool.
Awesome. And what about your thoughts on templates versus kind of the more black and white, solid, good formatting there? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so everyone's different, but I think using a template is good just because to keep it like you don't want to just throw stuff around and not know, like you want the recruiter to know where you're like where to look. So like you want to put your most important stuff at the top, and then it's just human nature that as you read through things, you get more tired and you just don't want to read as much. So definitely like putting a template or something where you have your most important stuff at the top, and like your companies are bolded and kind of the notes are not bolded, just like normal letters. I think that's important. So using a template, I think, is really good.
Okay, awesome. And you did say one page versus two, so we've already kind of got that. Any tips as far as like when it comes to the one page and you're going to cut stuff out? I would imagine we tell our students to take out stuff that's not as relevant to the job. But what are your thoughts on like kind of additional skills portions and other like summary versus additional skills where people like to list a lot of things? Yeah.
Yeah, so I personally think that the additional skills is more important than like the executive summary, because especially if we might be getting to this later, I assume, but if you do have a cover letter, like everything you want to say about like the job and what you're interested in, like is in that cover letter. So putting an executive summary on the resume is kind of just um picking up space, and some of these additional skills that people have are like really important, even if they don't like apply to the job specifically. It might apply to like the company as a whole, or it might just elevate the person in the recruiter's eyes. So I definitely think additional skills is good to have on there if you can fit it, and the executive summary is kind of less important.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all your resume. Anything else you want to share before we move on
Yeah,
about
I think
resumes?
so. Definitely the one page thing is a big thing I've seen. Just that, like I said, people don't want to look through more than a page. So just trying to keep it to one page is really important.
Awesome. Thanks.
That's great. You kind of set up the perfect segue for our next section, which is on cover letters. And you already mentioned how you can move the executive summary or maybe keep it off to not be redundant. But what would you say is the most important information to include in a cover letter?
Yeah, so I definitely think cover letters are important, even if a job tells you, like, doesn't say specifically to have one. I think you should definitely have one, just because it's kind of another way to showcase yourself to the company. Um, what usually I look for in a cover letter is more of just like why like you specifically like want this job and deserve this job, because the resume, like, we're in a world where a lot of people have the same experiences. Like this is really a chance to showcase like why you are special, like why you should get this job over someone else. So definitely in the cover letter, putting like why like you think you'd be a good match for the position, why like you specifically like have an upper hand to other people, I think is really good to put in there.
Great. We already kind of talked about one page versus two page when it comes to resumes. What's your take on cover letters? How long should they be, or how short should they be?
Yeah, so kind of similar, definitely not like I know resumes, like it's okay. Like if you have to do 2 pages, that's still like okay. But for the cover letters, I really recommend doing a page or less, like even just doing like a few paragraphs sometimes is okay, because it's really, you just need to put in those like important things in there. Whether like it's just like kind of your background, why you want the job, and like why you think you deserve it. Like it doesn't need more than a few paragraphs.
Okay. And then the last cover letter question, um, I know one thing that we've seen in our experience working with students is that sometimes their cover letter will just be an extension, not an extension of their resume, but kind of repeating what's on the
Mhm.
resume. What kind of advice do you have when you're dealing with a resume document and also a cover letter and knowing what to put in each? Or like, do you want to put all the same things on each document?
Yeah, so definitely this is a good way for if you do have your resume is maybe more than a page, like you can put some of that stuff that you are leaving out of your resume into your cover letter if you think it's important. I think it's okay to still like, especially the really important things, to have them on both your cover letter and your resume, just because if you really want to highlight that, like you should show it in both. But the cover letter is just, in my opinion, just a good way to really show, like, I feel like a resume is very just like words, black and white. Like a cover letter is more of a way to show the employer, like your personality and more about you.
Love that. It's all you, Shelly. Now we're
Okay,
moving
well,
into
did we talk
interviews.
about if yeah, you always add a cover letter,
Yes, definitely.
even if it's
It's my opinion.
okay. And you notice, because I think there can be, change. I've heard from other different industries that that's yes and no, but I think that, yeah, better to be safe than sorry for not including it, right?
You might as well have
And
it. If you don't read it, they don't read it, but it's good to at least have it there.
yeah, I love that you're highlighting too that like the personal aspect on the cover letter, like what are you bringing to this job outside of what I can already read on your resumes? And I would imagine that makes it a lot more personable for you too. Like you feel a connection with that individual, you'll be more interested to follow up.
Yeah, for sure.
I think going into interviews, virtual versus in-person interviews, how are you guys kind of navigating that? Is there, would also love to hear kind of tips on how to prepare for that, if it should be different than one than the other.
Yeah, so definitely most for our full-time positions, our interviews are all virtual, unless like it's for some of the higher positions, like for vice president, directors and stuff, those are sometimes in person, but especially for a job like right out of college, like they're all virtual right now. I did during my process, even which was 2 years ago, they were all virtual. So we just realized that people live all over the place. Like it's just easier to do virtual interviews. I think for me, at least I liked preparing the same way for an in-person and a virtual interview. Just because you want to give off the same impression. I will say sometimes it's hard to see people's emotions and personality over the computer. So maybe being a little more exaggerated in things could be helpful. Just showing the person like you do care. Like sometimes it's hard to show over the screen, which is I know it's annoying because like sometimes things are better in person. But just really like trying to show your personality, like be exaggerated, like don't be nervous to like just be yourself and like show yourself the same way you would in a virtual interview as an in-person interview. And then this might be a question that you're gonna ask, but at least for like clothing, I know a lot of times for like virtual meetings and stuff, people will wear like just the top half like nicer. I definitely recommend doing the whole outfit because sometimes you accidentally have to get up or something happens. And I've not for this job, luckily, but I've had it happen where I've been wearing like sweatpants and like a nice top, and then they see like the difference. So definitely, I know no one wants to have to put on like work pants or jeans or whatever, but just for the 30-minute or however long interview, just wear the whole outfit is my recommendation.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And I think if like your mindset, right? Like is your mind right? Like to be in full outfit where you're having to feel like you're in person, even if you're not.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good point too. Is like it just gets you more in that mindset of like what you want to like you're actually there for the interview. Like if you look the part, you'll feel the part kind of thing.
Yeah. And so what are the best etiquette or some etiquette tips for an interview? Like get there. So you can talk about in person and virtual, but like get there early, handshake, what's appropriate, eye contact, what are things you notice actually in the interview as well?
Yeah, so I think eye contact is a big thing. I'm probably not doing a great job on this, but definitely trying to like look at the camera, like on a virtual interview at least, like look where the camera is, and because like obviously you want them to think that you're engaged and like you want to find out what's happening, and if you look like you're looking somewhere else, they're going to be kind of confused and be like, oh, they don't care about the interview. For both virtual and in person, I definitely recommend being early, kind of the same thing with the cover letter. Like it's better to be prepared than like not. So like if you're 20 minutes early, like annoying, but you'd rather be early than late, because if you're late, then it'll seem like you don't care about the job again when you obviously do. You just need to show up late. So especially like with virtual interviews, like technology is weird and always has issues. So trying to get on your Zoom or however they're doing the call early, even if you have to wait in the waiting room for a little bit, I think is really important. And then for handshakes and that stuff, I think people like handshakes. I'm personally weird about handshakes. I'm just not a handshake person. So like I wouldn't really, like extend my hand, but I think it's professional to do that and just like extend a hand, and then the manager, whoever's interviewing you, will kind of play off of your feelings kind of thing.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So interesting, right? Like all the small details. Now I'm thinking about how COVID, it was like, no, you would never do that. And now we're like
Exactly.
trying to like reorient ourselves to what the normal etiquette is. Awesome. What about when you're doing an interview and there's an issue with technology? So internet goes down, you're stuck. Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, so at least here in my company and all the virtual interviews that I've been a part of, like everyone's understanding of technology and like things happen. So like as like an interviewee, like don't freak out about it. Like you're not gonna, if you lose the job over that, like maybe you shouldn't be working for that company, because like that's, things happen. Like you can try to get yourself in like a place where you know the Wi-Fi will work, like do everything you can on your end before, but if something does happen, like it's not totally your fault. It's technology is just technology sometimes. But definitely prepare yourself as much as you can. Try to be in a place where you know your Wi-Fi works. If it doesn't work, however you've been contacting the interviewer, just like email them or call them, or however you've been calling it, or however you've been talking to them, and be like, hey, my Wi-Fi went down, I'm so sorry. And then you guys can kind of figure out a plan from there.
Perfect. And in an interview, what if an applicant doesn't know how to answer the question, right? Some of our students ask us a lot, like I get stuck, I'm not sure. How do you suggest, do you encourage them to ask for a minute? Like, is that okay? Do you guys see that as like a wise choice, or any suggestions on those type of situations?
Yeah, so that's what I was about to say, is like it's okay to take a minute to think. We'd rather you like sit there and really think through your answer than just come out with some answer that you don't mean, or that you don't, isn't your best answer. Like the interviewers are like okay with you just taking a minute. Like we'd rather you think about your thoughts. So I know it might feel awkward in the moment, but like it's not actually awkward. Like it's okay to take a moment and think about your thoughts. And at least one of my tips I always did is like I would always just write some notes for myself, so that like for questions I might ask and things that I want to remember. So if you do ever forget, like you can always take a look at your notes, like take a minute, and that's okay.
Great. And what about if like, or I guess any suggestions I would say on what they should do to help with the stress in interview? We know that can be like nerve-wracking. I'm sure you've seen people shaking or like, getting stuck in their words and stumbling. So yeah, any suggestions on that?
Yeah, so uh, it it sucks, but the stress doesn't ever go away. I think it's just kind of getting used to that stress. So what I recommend is just doing as many practices as you can before, whether it's with a teacher, a friend, a coworker, your parents, your family, like just practicing interviews was my, at least a really good trick for me. And that helps me like get more comfortable as I did the real thing. Obviously, you're gonna be stressed no matter what. Like some people are just like that where they don't get stressed, and I wish I could be that kind of person. But like you're gonna have stress, and it's okay if you don't. So it's just kind of working through that stress and getting comfortable with the stress.
Okay. And let's talk about follow-up. Is it appropriate to follow up the same day that the interview happened with an thank you email or even a thank you card? Thoughts on that?
Definitely follow up. I that that's definitely a big thing, that if you do that, it again shows that you care, show that you want it. I would say wait maybe a little bit after the interview. Like don't, especially if it's a virtual interview, like you probably have the email ready and good to go, but like give it a few minutes, because
Oh, okay. I was like, is this like a 24-hour window? Is this a
just
1 hour?
just like 10-15 minutes, just because like if you like send it immediately, then they'll be like, oh, like I guess like they
Oh, yeah.
sent it, So just having like a little bit of time in between. I guess not a 24 hours. Like you can do it like 10-15 minutes out after.
Okay.
But definitely sending some kind of follow-up. A thank you card, I think, is really cool if you can do that, just because people don't get, like, we don't get mail anymore. So like that would be really special to get that, but like you don't have to do that if you can't mail something. Definitely, even anything, like an email, a call, something, just to show that you're thanking them and you appreciate the interview is important.
Awesome. And what about follow-up after it's been 2 weeks and they haven't heard anything from the hiring manager? When is that window? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? They can follow up and actually ask about their interview.
Yeah, I would say give it at least 2 weeks, because sometimes it just is a long process. Like, there might be a lot of interviews or something. So just giving the hiring manager time. If you follow up too early, they might be like, oh, why are they following up? I haven't had enough time. But 2 weeks is definitely a good amount of time where they should have some kind of progress, whether they have an answer or not. They might not have an answer, but they'll at least be like, oh, thank you for following up. Like, we're still working on the thing.
Great. And last question from the interviews. Any other tips you have for interviewing, virtual or in person?
Yeah, I think kind of just what I've been saying the whole time. Just be yourself. It's a stressful process applying for a job, but as much as you can be yourself and just you know your experience, you know what you're doing. Just try not to let it overcome you, and just whatever happens, happens. If you're yourself and they like you, like what's meant to be is meant to be, kind of thing.
I love
Awesome.
that. And I definitely live by that motto, so I love that.
Mhm.
You know, while we were talking about the virtual interviews, something that I thought about, I remember thinking I was planning ahead and doing the right thing. And so I took my virtual interview. Well, actually, it wasn't virtual, it was on a call.
Mhm.
And I did it in the car, thinking that was the best place because it would be really quiet. I would be insulated. And of course, emergency vehicles were going by, and it was such a distraction. So do you have any advice on like where people, especially like if our students have a roommate, like where they should go to do a virtual or phone interview?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say if they can, I think the libraries at UF hopefully still have like meeting rooms and stuff. I would say trying to do a meeting room, like obviously there will be people walking around and there's always distractions, but that way, like you're in a room, you have it booked, like no one's gonna walk in. Um, it's a library or like some kind of building where like people might be talking, but no one will be like screaming or anything. So it should be a pretty quiet, normal place. And unless something super unforeseen happens, like a fire alarm going off, it's a good quiet place to do an interview. So I recommend that.
Great advice. Okay, so getting into networking a little bit. I love talking about networking. I feel like with sports, you just got to do it. So, what would you say? How important is networking in the sports industry?
Yeah, I think it's the most important. I'm always harping on networking. It's always about who you know, the connections you can make. It's just a lot of how the sports world works, as you guys all know, is that it's just all about like someone who can email someone and then like get you at least in the door for an interview. Like they might not be able to get you a job, but they can at least give you the opportunity to have an interview. So I think networking is the most important thing. Getting to know as many people as you can and as many places as you can is really important.
Network, always. It never ends. Okay, what is the best way? So we have a virtual career fair that's actually taking place this week. And so what's the best way students can network in an environment like that? Like, do you have any advice that might help them stand out in that kind of unique situation?
Yeah, I never heard of a virtual career fair, so it's very cool that you guys are doing that.
Right?
Our first year. It's very exciting.
Super exciting, especially for people who aren't on campus, that they can still
Exactly.
involve themselves. I'm trying to think, just I don't know exactly like the format of how it would go, but I kind of just give the same advice of what I was saying for the virtual interviews, like whatever you can do to make yourself stand out, whether it's, just researching the company before, and then like when you're talking to them, say something specific about their company that maybe the average person wouldn't know. Doing a follow-up email, kind of just a lot of that same interview etiquette I would say to do for the career fair, because a lot of people wouldn't think to send like a thank you or a follow-up after just a conversation, but even every little thing helps. So even doing a follow-up on that would be really good. And I know when I'm at job fairs and stuff, when someone mentions something about my company that like even maybe I don't know or I'm not expecting, I'm like, oh wow, like you really did your research. Like that's awesome. So definitely like that helps you stand out a lot.
I love that. And I like the idea of the picture on the resume in these types of
For sure.
environments, because if it is something virtual, maybe that headshot would kind of jog that recruiter's memory. And so it all kind of works together.
Exactly.
So the last question is kind of all encompassing. You've answered so many questions. Would you say that some of the answers to those questions might be dependent on different HR personnel?
Yeah, so I'd say all of my answers are definitely dependent on the HR person or the hiring manager, which I know I was always frustrated as a student hearing that. But like there is like some of the things I said that like are very like commonplace, like the doing a cover letter, doing the 1-page resume, like a lot of that stuff you really should keep in mind for like every company. But then there's other things, like you said, maybe doing the head job. Some managers might like that, some people might not. And just kind of doing your research and your background on the company and the job and kind of trying to understand what they like is just my best advice. But it sadly is different for every person, but you can kind of just do some, if you, a lot of these things are common, but it really always just depends on the person.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Well, those are all the questions we have. Do you have any kind of final imparting wisdom that you want to share with any of the students?
Yeah, I think I've kind of said it a few times, but the job search is a lot and it's scary and it's stressful. It was definitely the most stressful time of my life, I think. So like I said, like don't what is meant to be is meant to be. You're gonna end up in the job that you're supposed to be. If something that you really wanted doesn't work out, pick yourself back up, do what you can. Whatever is meant to happen is meant to happen, basically.
I love that. And I really hope our students internalize that, because it is a daunting process. You kind of putting yourself out there, it's kind of vulnerable. And then you're like, I hope they
100%.
like me enough. And so when you get that rejection email, it can be so disheartening. But I completely agree with you. I think closed doors are just guidance, and it's just getting you to the right place. So
Exactly.
I love that.
Okay, wait, I have one more question. I just remembered.
Yeah.
Sorry. But this is relevant to people once they send their resume or once they apply on Teamworks, wherever, you know, I think a lot of your jobs might be there, but reaching out to connections, right? How do you utilize your connections well without being over the top, like having everyone contact you? So yeah, just last question came to my mind, thought it would be helpful.
That's a great question because I have people that reach out to me on LinkedIn all the time, and there's some people who I'm like, some people like they do too much or like they do the perfect amount. So it's a really great question. I'd say definitely like apply for the job before you reach out. But kind of what we were talking about with the networking, like it's really important to have a relationship with these people before you apply for a job at their company. Whether it's literally just to get on the phone with them for 10 minutes about what they do and their job in the company, having some sort of like relationship prior to applying is really important for me, at least. Like if someone just randomly messages me on LinkedIn, like, oh, I applied for this position, like, thank you. Like there's not much I can like do with that. But maybe if it's someone I've been connected with for a few years and I've talked to before, they're like, hey, like, don't know if you remember me, kind of remind them of your conversation and be like, I applied for this job. And then I'm more inclined to help, or a connection will be more inclined to help if you kind of have that prior relationship.
Perfect. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us today and taking some time to share about best practices for our students who are kind of entering this next stage in their life. We are certain that the University of Florida Department of Sport Management students, faculty, and alumni appreciate and value your thoughts that you shared with us today. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me and letting me impart some of my wisdom for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.